And I think what President Trump's argument is that if these people nonetheless are supposed to be our friends and our allies, put NATO aside, he thinks of them as our friends. If during our time of...
Wait, does Trump think of them as our friends?
I think the United States as a whole...
He leaked texts with the Prime Minister of Norway?
I think the United States as a whole does. I think President Trump personally thinks that our allies probably need to be maybe...
He treats them like enemies and he treats Russia like allies.
Adam Mockler went on Abby Phillip's panel and absolutely dismantled the MAGA apologists, Noah Rothman and Breonna Lyman. And honestly, it was a thing of beauty. The panel was discussing Trump's disastrous war against Iran, now entering its fourth week with thousands more troops being deployed, mission creep already happening, and the Strait of Hormuz effectively closed. Trump promised a 4 to 6 week war, and we're already blowing past that timeline. Mockler exposed the endless contradictions. Trump spent 18 months trashing our allies, then got shocked when they wouldn't join his coalition. He claims Iran was an imminent threat for 47 years, yet did nothing during his first term. He calls NATO a paper tiger while begging for their ships. And the most devastating line came from Mockler. He treats our allies like enemies, and he treats Russia like allies. That's the whole game right there. The host, Chris on Culture, rightly points out that Trump has strengthened Iran, alienated every democracy on earth, and dragged us into another forever war with no plan and no exit strategy.
As the war against Iran enters its fourth week, the pressure is mounting on Donald Trump economically, politically, domestically, and globally. Thousands more U.S. Marines and sailors are heading toward the Middle East in what is likely to be a treacherous mission. The president faces the danger of losing control of the war after Israel struck a gas field that he claimed he wasn't aware of. He's facing tensions with allies after he says that they refused his help in the war. He's facing rising gas prices at home, along with higher inflation and lower markets. He's asking for money for a war that is not popular with Americans and a price tag not popular with Republicans. He's facing criticism from many of his own supporters for what they say are broken promises. And all of this is coming as primaries and campaigns are heating up for the midterm elections. This is a Trump administration that is in a perilous moment. Whether you agree or disagree with this war, their decisions from this point forward could really matter not just for how the war progresses, but also the politics of it for the Republicans this year in the midterms.
Oh, we're talking not about the midterms. We're talking about history. This is an epochal war. On the other side of it, we don't know what that looks like. But it will not be the world that existed on February 27th. An entire new world exists for us after this. And the president seems as calm and at peace and steadfast and resolute as I have ever seen him, including with tariffs. How he responded when he introduced those tariffs on Liberation Day in 2025 was very erratic. And he was easily moved by the polls and by pressure from Republicans and pressure from the markets.
You think so?
Oh yeah, he responded to the markets within weeks. The markets have been moving here in ways that the president has not reacted to.
Okay. All right. Well, I will agree to disagree on that one. I'm not sure that he, I think he tried to stick by his guns on a lot of the tariffs, for example. But on this, I mean, you're right. It's going to be incredibly significant what he does. But every day we're getting a different story from Donald Trump about what he is doing.
We're not even quite sure that Donald Trump and Israel are on the same page. It doesn't seem like it. I'm glad you brought up the tariffs as well, because when they announced the tariffs, they said this is short-term pain for long-term gain. That was like 14 months ago, 12 months ago, and we're still in the short-term pain part. When are we going to enter the long-term gain part? Because tariffs imposed a $1,000 tax on American families in 2025. Now this war is spiking the price of oil, spiking the price of gas, spiking everything, and the economy is suffering. Now we're entering week 4 of this war that Trump said would be 4 to 6 weeks, and we're sending thousands of new troops to the Middle East, meaning probably take about a week for them to get there.
I think it might take a lot longer.
Longer than a week. So that means we're going to blow through this 4 to 6 week timeline. We're experiencing major mission creep already before we even reach this. Mission creep is when the size, scope, and scale of the mission slowly expands. We experience it in Afghanistan and Iraq, and I'm very worried that's going to happen now.
Just briefly to respond to you, I agree. I will say that I don't think the president and his subordinates have said as early and often as they should, because that's a messaging operation. Say it again and again and again until everybody can repeat it. Exactly what the purpose of this war is and why it was necessary. But the purpose of this war, as they have said, perhaps not to my satisfaction, with the frequency,
a lot of things.
But nevertheless, no, they have said that we need to degrade and eliminate Iran's capacity to project power abroad. And when they project power abroad, they kill Americans. We've gotten really good at interdicting the amount of effort that the Iranians put into killing us. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, a lot of personnel. It's one of the reasons why we can never execute the pivot to Asia. On the other side of this war is the possibility of another world without the Islamic regime.
Wait a minute.
Without the foremost sponsor of Islamist terrorism in North America, in Europe, in Latin America. And yes, it is a national security issue, whether or not Israel is on the same page with us, because the American people are under threat every day.
If we achieve
that threat is a value.
So just think, you might be right. It might be that eliminating Iran was the most important thing. The question I have is why, if that's true, why didn't the president take the time to try to woo the American people, to get them onto his side, to build a coalition with our allies, to get them onto our side, so we could go out and actually we could prosecute this war with our country being behind it, and our allies standing with us. Instead, what we have is a president who seems to only know how to use the sticks these days. He doesn't know how to use the carrots. And so we are at this point where it seems like we're making it up as we go, and he's upset because he can't get anybody else in the world to join us. But he's been talking trash about them for 18 months.
Here's what he wrote about NATO on Friday. He said, without the USA, NATO is a paper tiger. They didn't want to join the fight to stop a nuclear-powered Iran. He calls them cowards, and he says, we will remember. I think the question that comes up for me is that doesn't seem like a message that's written from a position of strength. If you have allies, treaty allies, that you then have to turn around and insult and reprimand and all of that stuff because you couldn't convince them to come along with you on something, that seems like a sign of weakness.
I think it actually is the opposite. It's the fact that he's willing
that he can't get NATO to come along with him.
First of all, it's the fact that he's willing to lose our allies because they so much don't contribute to our own efforts that he says, we don't need it. Take it or leave it. If we have them, great. If we don't have them, we don't need them. Second of all, when it comes to NATO, this is an organization that had never funded appropriately their own share of the burden. And they have been pissed at Donald Trump since the day he came down that escalator because he has wanted them to pay for their fair share. Last but not least, look, the Strait of Hormuz is not just beneficial to the United States, okay? Europe is also benefiting from it, right? Sulfur travels through that Strait of Hormuz. That sulfur then goes to Africa for farming. It goes to Europe for farming. They also need to hope and pray that that thing can open. So the fact that right now the United States has done a lot of the bulk work and is saying, can you guys now come and step up because you are our allies? Should you not help us when we need some help?
We're doing the bulk work of a war that we started?
But we're
not picking sides. Because Iran started a war 47 years ago. We're finishing the war.
Wait,
we're not picking sides for backyard soccer here, right? What we're doing is we're trying to figure out how do we wage a war? And that means you got to bring people along with you onto your side. And so the question is, why are they just now figuring this out? I don't. There is no answer to that question. Why didn't we spend the time that we spent? And those of us who are old enough to remember going into Iraq, right?
Right.
Before that, George Bush, even though I disagree with it, but he had a mounted campaign going to the United Nations, talking to the American people, stories in the newspapers. So the American public was on board with
this. The coalition of the willing. I mean, look, it's been 47 years. What's a few more months getting allies on board?
Well, I'll tell you, this was an emergency exigency. This wasn't an 8-month build-up.
Was it?
Yes, it was. Because after Midnight Hammer, we had evidence, and I think the administration
said the opposite this week
that they had
testimony.
That they had evidence that they were not.
She said,
that they had evidence that they were not developing their nuclear program. What they have said, because they lack the resources to get that material out of the lightly irradiated tons of rubble that it's under, what they said is that they're building it with more speed and alacrity than we can build interceptors, ballistic missiles. And this was an emergency buildup because of the protests in December and January. That happened out of the blue.
Listen,
and then we got the regime that appeared weak.
That ballistic missiles alone are a justification for war with Iran is not even an argument that this administration is making.
They make it all the time.
They were making the case. They were making the case that Iran was a nuclear threat and that we would never let them have a nuclear weapon. Their ballistic missile capability was not such that nobody has argued that it could reach the homeland. There's no argument of that.
They're making.
Israel has been and remains in the zone of danger. But I guess I don't know that if you were to take that to the American people and say, Iran was building conventional weapons, ballistic missiles, and we need to go to war with them for the first time in 47 years, I'm not sure that would be a winning argument, which is why they weren't making it.
They started making it again. Right before the war, but during the war and afterwards. And the argument is very clear that this is a missile capability that will deny us access so that we can't do another Midnight Hammer without experiencing unacceptable losses and maybe not achieving our mission results. The reason why this happened in 2 months is because we had a window of opportunity. The intelligence was there to hit their leadership, and we decimated their leadership. The regime was weaker than it had ever been, experiencing the worst protests they had ever seen. It wasn't an 8-month buildup, and it's looking like an exigency, an emergency contingency operation, because that is what it is.
The contradictions here are endless. So in one breath, this is a 47-year war. It's been going on for 47 years. In the next breath, there was an imminent threat coming from Iran. And then the next breath, we were just trying to defang their nuclear capabilities. And then one person will say, we did defang the Iranian regime. But then Trump is now mobilizing thousands of more troops. So obviously this is going to be elongated and continue to happen. Here's a timeline regarding the Strait of Hormuz as I see it, because you guys were talking about it. Donald Trump claimed that he was going to assemble a group, a coalition, if you will, of powerful countries to escort ships through the Strait of Hormuz. He then realized, the same international community that I have been antagonizing for the past 2 years isn't going to want to go on a suicide mission through the Strait of Hormuz, which at its most narrow navigable shipping lane is 2 miles, right off the coast of Iran. They can just lob missiles over. So it's a suicide mission. He realizes, they're not going to help me with that. And then the countries themselves say, we're not going to join a war we didn't even start. And then when I come on this panel, you guys are like, these countries don't want to help us finish the job. They didn't start the job. They didn't start any of this.
So why are they our allies?
Because we are a coalition.
Do they all get like veto power when President Donald Trump does?
NATO is a defensive coalition meant to defend countries. Article 5 is invoked when one is attacked. Article 5 is not invoked when we attack a country. That is a fundamental axiom of NATO.
Right. And I think what President Trump's argument is that if these people nonetheless are supposed to be our friends and our allies, put NATO aside, he thinks of them as our friends. If during our time...
Wait, does Trump think of them as our friends?
I think the United States as a whole...
He leaked text with the Prime Minister of Norway?
I think the United States as a whole does. I think President Trump personally thinks that our allies probably need to be... maybe
he treats them like enemies, and he treats Russia like allies.
By force, if necessary. He threatened to take property from one of our allies.
The funniest part about it is none of our allies could do a damn thing about it if he actually took Greenland.
You know what? Here's the thing. This is a question. This is not a question of. I mean, if it were just a question of who's stronger and who's not, then yeah, what would be the point of alliances? But it is a question of leadership. And again, I mean, as we were talking earlier about the president's inability to actually develop a coalition for something that presumptively is in the global interest, that seems to me like the clearest sign of the weaknesses of their ability to convince not just us in the layman world, but these are other countries they can share intelligence with of the actual objectives of this conflict.
Yeah, I actually don't begrudge any European power that's a little miffed at how they've been treated over the last year, especially since they've been hearing from the Pentagon NATO should be an in-theater operation. Right. The alliance should be acting in Europe's interest and only in Europe, and then all of a sudden the administration comes around and says, hey, why don't you help us in West Asia? At the same time, however, we need their ships as escorts, not to conduct combat operations, to just be there. We have an ally that in this fight, which is the most capable, it's the most capable combat operation. It's not a suicide mission.
We got to leave it there.
Adam Mockler cut straight through the MAGA gaslighting on that panel, and the contradiction he exposed is the entire story of this disastrous war. For 18 months, Trump trashed our allies, called them cowards, insulted NATO, demanded they pay up or get out, and then acted shocked when they wouldn't join his coalition against Iran. You can't spend 2 years burning bridges and then expect those same countries to sail into the Strait of Hormuz, a 2-mile-wide suicide choke point, to escort your ships. Mockler was absolutely right. Trump treats our friends like enemies and our enemies like friends, and that's not strength. It's strategic insanity that has left the United States more isolated than ever. The imminent threat narrative is a complete fabrication, and Mockler exposed that too. If Iran was such an existential danger for 47 years, why did Trump do nothing about it in his first term? Why didn't he act when he had unified Republican control of government? The answer is obvious. There was no imminent threat. There was no urgent nuclear breakout. There was no ticking clock. What there was a president who wanted a war to distract from his domestic failures. And he found a window after the protests in Iran and decided to plunge us into another Middle East quagmire. And now, 4 weeks in, we're sending thousands more troops. Mission creep is already happening, and the Strait of Hormuz is closed, which means Iran is actually more powerful and more dangerous than before the war started. Noah Rothman and Brianna Lyman did their usual MAGA routine, repeating the same tired talking points about Iran being the #1 state sponsor of terror and how we've been fighting them for 47 years. But they never answered the simple question. If this was such an urgent crisis, why didn't the administration build a coalition first? Why didn't they make the case to the American people? Why didn't they bring our allies on board? Because they couldn't. Because the case for war was weak, the intelligence was shaky, and Trump's own rhetoric had alienated everyone who might have helped. Instead of leadership, we got tantrums. Instead of diplomacy, we got sticks. And now we're paying the price in blood and treasure. Jamal Bowman also made a crucial point that the MAGA apologists couldn't refute. NATO is a defensive alliance. Article 5 is invoked when a member is attacked, not when we decide to attack someone else. The idea that our allies should blindly follow us into every war we start is absurd, especially when we've spent years treating them with contempt. The host was right to compare it to a friend who constantly picks fights. At some point, you stop backing them up because you realize they're the problem. That's what our allies have realized about the United States under Trump. We're the problem. We're the ones starting wars, destabilizing regions, and then wondering why nobody wants to help us clean up the mess. The long-term damage here is incalculable. Trump has strengthened Iran, alienated Europe, emboldened Russia, and proven to the world that American commitments mean nothing. He's left us with a war that has no clear objective, no exit strategy, and no end in sight. And he's doing it while gas prices spike, inflation rises, and the stock market tanks. This is not strength. This is not leadership. This is a reckless, incompetent, ego-driven disaster that will haunt the United States for generations. And Adam Mockler was right to call it out. We need more voices like his, willing to speak truth to power, willing to expose the lies, and willing to remind the American people that we don't have to accept this. We can fight back. We can demand better, and we will. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever.